everyone, and welcome to the Culture Cast. I'm Chris Stashew, and I am joined by my favorite member of the Tarsus Club, Mr. Eric Niss.
Yeah, I guess, the jig is up.
The jig is up, the jig is down. The jig is boogieing all around town.
Oh, Jesus that
Christ.
Should be cut out.
White people saying white things, like, folks. Boy, we are the worst, aren't we?
Oh my God, you're the worst.
I know, I get that a lot. And we are continuing Horrortober with a look at Christopher MacBride's The Conspiracy.
Society's been constructed in a way to keep people asleep, to keep them in debt, to keep them feeling powerless, conditioned to deny what's right in front of its eyes.
Which is what?
That we're slaves.
We will fight for our freedom because we know what freedom feels like.
It wasn't so much conspiracy theories themselves as it was the people who believe in them that attracted me.
I feel pretty exposed.
Conspiracy theories are more prevalent in our society today than they've ever been.
Terrence and guys like him, if they're wrong, then it's really crazy that they could be so delusional.
I is the guy who bankrolled 9/11, meeting with the CIA.
If they're not,
Terrence!
people don't just disappear. He's got like the string of dates here, and he's clearly connected them to like important events. Formation of the Fed, World War I, 9/11. It's all about this thing called the Tarsus Club, which is like a retreat for politicians, for corporate leaders, people like... That's what the dates are. That's what Terrence is looking into.
Very real and tangible shifts in world financial markets and foreign policy coincided with these retreats.
Camera down, please.
Has anyone ever tried to infiltrate one of these meetings? You know, I realize now that they're never going to let this movie get out.
Let's say that there are these people that secretly run things. Then they've always run things.
Throughout history, men have been trying to conquer the world. From Alexander the Great to Napoleon to Hitler. If anyone thinks this time we live in is any different, I'd ask them. Which one of us is really crazy?
Film came out in 2013. It's, like I mentioned, directed and written by Christopher MacBride, stars Aaron Poole, James Gilbert, and Ian Anderson. We actually have interviews with both Aaron Poole and James Gilbert, so we'll play those here in a little bit. Film centers around the two friends, James Gilbert and Aaron Poole, as they make a documentary about conspiracy theories that ends up going way too far when they find out about a group called the Tarsus Club. So, Eric, this was a pick of yours. You picked this for us to watch. I kind of asked you about it. We got some really great interviews. And so here we are talking about it. So I'm curious, Eric, why did you pick The Conspiracy?
It's found footage month. So I was trying to think about found footage movies that maybe not everybody has seen that I liked and wanted to maybe share with some of the people who listen to our broadcasts, because apparently people do.
Yeah, it's apparently that's a thing.
So
big. I won't say your name on the podcast, but you know who you are. So big shout out to you for approaching me in public and asking me if I do a podcast. So that's cool. That's that's not something I would have ever expected.
Yeah, it's pretty weird and it's pretty cool. And now you know why this is an audio podcast and not a video podcast.
Yeah.
Anyways, so I don't know. I had seen this movie a few years ago, and something about this movie had really kind of stuck with me. Definitely one of like the better executed found footage movies that I had seen in a while. And so I thought, even though it's not necessarily strictly a horror movie, I think it definitely fits in well, albeit maybe on the outskirts with some of the other movies that we're watching this month.
Yeah, it's not horror per se. I mean, it is horror. It's more, I would say it verges closer on to thriller more than horror, which is fine.
Like a thriller, real life horror movie. Like, there are definitely parts of this movie that are very horror-esque for sure. But I wouldn't strictly call it a horror movie. It sort of straddles that line between thriller and horror, and it's a very like psychologically driven movie. So a lot of the things that are scary about this movie are really things when the movie like asks questions that you can't really answer, and so you're sort of left there to think about like, what if, or who are these people, or what are they doing, type of thing. So
right, and I think that's what's fun about this movie, is it does kind of play with your preconceived ideas and notions about the conventions of what found footage is. And again, this is another great example of what is good in found footage and how you can really play with this subgenre and kind of create something that's unique, because it is a faux documentary, but at the same time, it's found footage. Because it's about 2/3 documentary, 1/3 found footage. And the found footage part of the film is kind of the horror aspect of it. And that's what's fun about it, is because you're really given this interesting kind of world building, this setup with the Tarsus Club, and kind of going back and kind of giving you the roots and the reasons behind why this club exists. And then you have the two characters infiltrating the Tarsus Club, and the two characters who bear the same names of the actual actors. And you have this infiltration of the Tarsus Club at the end of the film, and it's a horror movie, so of course something has to happen, something kind of crazy has to happen. And I don't think we should spoil this movie. I think this movie is best left going into it kind of blind. It's a lot of fun if you don't know where it's going. I mean, if you've seen found footage films, you kind of probably have an idea of where this is going, but at the same time, you don't know exactly where it's going, which is what makes it fun. But it is kind of, it pushes this line of what's considered a documentary, what's a faux documentary, what's considered found footage. And it has this really interesting meeting in the middle that works because the character relationship between Aaron and Jim is so believable. You feel for these characters. You want to see them not, have a, I don't know. It's one of those things where they're believable, and you go with this on this ride with them, and you want to, see where their characters end up. And there is a satisfying, albeit kind of dour conclusion to the film, but it's such an interesting ride that this is really a standout in the found footage genre, and it does something different. This isn't creepy crawly monsters. This isn't aliens. This isn't really poorly done ghosts. Sorry, Paranormal Activity, but I've never been a fan. And so it's very different in the genre, and I think that's what makes it really fun.
Yeah, and that's also part of the reason why I wanted to talk about it, because you're right, it's not supernatural at all. Spoilers. And what makes this movie, and the parts of this movie that are scary, is how close to real life it could be.
Well, and let's be honest, if you know anything about conspiracy theories, you know that there is, I mean, every good story like this has some modicum of truth to it.
Exactly. Yeah. This movie is really built off of a lot of existing conspiracy theories.
New World Order, Bilderbergs.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where it does a really good job building a believable universe out of stuff that already exists, so that you go into this. And I think if you showed this to somebody under the right circumstances and you didn't tell them that it was a movie and you just told them that it was a documentary, I think that you could elicit a pretty strong, effect from somebody. I think it's made well enough to be believable. I mean, I've seen documentaries that are worse than this movie, so No,
the fact that it's based off of reality, like I said, the Bilderbergs, stuff like that, like you said, if you did show this to someone and they were kind of not aware of this film, and it's not like this film got like a massive release, it wasn't in the box office, it was kind of flew under the radar. I mean, I'd seen it a couple times on Netflix. I think people might actually think it was real because of how convincing the first 2/3 of the film are.
Yeah. And I mean, that's a real, I mean, for this movie to really kind of pull that off and like really kind of build up this universe and then sort of throw you off the deep end, and sort of like the third act is, it's really well done, you know? It's the tension building in this movie is done in a really, really solid way. And there was I think, pretty worthwhile payoff at the end. Yeah.
You know, and that's the thing is that I don't know if I would have liked it as much if the last third of the film where they get into the Tarsus Club.
Yeah, where it becomes a found footage thing.
Right. I'm not sure I would have been as on board if that part hadn't been as successful as this.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that could have easily just been like very boring and, you know, very normal. But then when things take like, you know, it's definitely got that like whole like, oh, wow, this is really creepy. This is like, you know, secret society, you know, like whatever. And they could have just left it at that. They could have just left it at like, yeah, this is creepy and weird, but like, you know, nothing, you know, super messed up is going on or whatever. But then it takes a hard left turn very, very quickly. And it's sort of all of that sort of like creeping dread that has sort of been building the whole movie sort of like comes to a head like very fast. And it doesn't give you a whole lot of time to really question anything or, you know, think too hard about it, which is good.
Well, and that's the thing is, like you said, it builds tension in a way that feels natural. It's a naturalistic way of building tension. It's not where you know, like Paranormal Activity or some of the other found footage films where there's something going on in the background. And I'm not saying that can't be successful, but in a film like...
there's lots of movies and things where I really like that kind of stuff, where it's like...
Hell, Ghostwatch is just like that, and Ghostwatch is amazing. It's got stuff going on in the background that you have to go back and watch again. But this isn't that, and that's why this works so well, is because this is a pretty kind of playing it straight, head-on approach to creating massive amounts of tension.
Right. Yeah. And, you know, and the tension is, you know, it's all unseen. It's all unknown. It's like there's not something, like you said, walking, you know, down the hallway in the back of the shot or whatever, or creeping behind people like that they don't know about. It's sort of this fear of the unknown type of thing, that, you know, I always find is way more effective, you know, in movies or real life or art in general. You know, it's one of those things, like my imagination of how, even when we're talking about conspiracies and things like that, my imagination on how nefarious and how bad things are is much more scary to me than somebody telling me, well, they do this and this and this, or even potentially worse yet, show you in like a cheesy, shitty way. And so I really like how they kept everything specific enough so that you have something to latch onto, but also vague enough so that you can sort of like scare yourself and really psych yourself out while you're watching it, you know, up until, you know, you have the payoff at the end.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, I don't know kind of how into conspiracy theory culture you are, but that's kind of why this film resonated with me so much, was because there is that level of realism that the film brings. I mean, if you go on YouTube,
oh yeah,
and you watch any conspiracy theory video, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's very similar to this. I mean, not in the production value. I mean, obviously,
no, but
you know, not in the way, not in the way that, you know, you would I mean, I don't know. The production value in this film is much higher than any of those Yahoo's videos talking about how the Denver airport is the source of the New World Order, and that's where all the conspiracy theories are, and the 46th eagle of the apocalypse, or whatever that guy's name is. That guy is great if you've never seen those videos.
No,
or,
I
you know,
haven't.
better than, you know, Loose Change, the 9/11 documentary. That's, I mean, look, it's entertaining in the way that you kind of watch it and you're like, can people actually believe this? But then you find yourself being like, but, and that's what is interesting about this film is, like you said, it does kind of sow the seeds of question early on, and they do pay off.
Right.
But
and
I mean, the thing with this film, and I think that's why this film's mileage may vary, is if you are not into conspiracy theories, this film may not kind of have the gut punch impact that it did for me, because I am inherently someone who is just drawn to conspiracies and conspiracy theories.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and it's one of those things like whether or not you actually believe in conspiracy theories and, you know, subscribe to some of the, you know, beliefs that people spout on the internet or whatever. It's one of those things like if you're the type of person like you and like I, where you hear something that doesn't sound super duper crazy, that sounds like maybe plausible, that sounds like, you know, if somebody says, I mean, I don't know, for an example, 9/11 is an inside job, you go like, huh, okay.
Which is a really bombastic statement, but there are things about it that...
Yeah, but I mean, it could be. Like, we don't know. And that's one of those things, like, I mean, I don't know. I'm not on the podcast trying to convince you that 9/11 was an inside job, because I honestly don't know, and I don't care enough to argue it either way, really. It's just the idea that could be a thing leaves me open to other things. And so I think that's why that movie was effective to me, you know, because I could suspend disbelief very easily and go along with the story, you know, without questioning too much, and really sort of filling in the blanks with my own like preconceived, you know, ideas about conspiracies and similar things.
Well, and again, that's why I said, you know, mileage on this film may vary. You may watch this film and be like, oh, it's just fucking boring. I don't care about conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories are stupid. People who believe in them are idiots. I mean, and look, I'm you know, like you said, we don't want to sit here and talk about how 9/11 was an inside job, but at the same time, there is this general sense in the United States and in other countries where people are educated that if you talk about conspiracy theories, you are inherently a kook, and you are someone that is not, you know, information coming out of your mouth because of your opinion on something is not to be trusted.
Sure.
And I think that is really unfortunate, because people believing the narrative, and this is not in relation to 9/11, because I think that the whole 9/11 was an inside job thing. It's a very deep and complex question, and it's not about inside job as to more about who benefited from what. But with something like a conspiracy theory and automatically discounting someone's opinion when it comes to believing in a conspiracy versus, you know, just believing the kind of the party line or the kind of the official statements made by, you know, the government or the police or what have you, it has been shown that there are people that are out for themselves to do certain things, and they have a vested interest in things being a certain way and people believing a certain thing. I mean, lest we not forget, for the longest time, ever since shows like The X-Files, and even before that, people made jokes about Big Brother watching you and that they're recording your calls and your cell phone can listen in on you even when it's turned off. And not more than 5 years ago, Edward Snowden comes out and releases massive amounts of information saying that that's exactly what's happening. And this is not a conspiracy theory, this is reality. Yeah. And so that's kind of in my mind when we have people saying, oh, you know, we shouldn't listen to people conspiracy theories. They're absolute kooks and whacks and cranks and total crackpots. It's like doing that is not helpful to kind of fostering intellectual conversation about something. Do people have incorrect ideas about stuff? Of course. Do people have bad opinions or opinion that I don't agree with? Of course.
And sometimes their opinions are just bad.
Right. I mean, there are people out there who have opinions that are just misguided. And again, it's an opinion, so it's technically not incorrect, but a misguided opinion. And so...
an uninformed opinion.
Right. That's a better way of putting it. And so when you have something like The Conspiracy with, you know, a film that deals directly in the kind of the stock and trade of conspiracy theories, if you're not into this, you're not going to like it. You're going to be bored and you're going to check out immediately. But if you give the film a chance and you buy into it, it's great because it really hits home. And it's, like I said, it's if you showed it to the right, like you said, if you showed it to the right person, they would think it's real. It's so well done, you would think it's real.
Yeah, I agree. It's a weirdly, I mean, not really weirdly, it's just a very simple movie that's highly effective. It's very lean. It's not even an hour and a half.
And that's a good thing.
Yeah, and it just motors through it. It just gets right to the point, which I think adds to the realistic effect of it being a documentary, because it's one of those things where they're really, like, the two guys in the movie are really just dealing in facts, and they're talking to this guy because he's a conspiracy nut or whatever. And at first they're like, oh, this guy's nice and he's cool and he's talking to us about his conspiracies. But, like, he's just like this weird, crazy guy or whatever.
He is that guy on YouTube.
Yeah. And then,
imagine interviewing the guy on YouTube who makes his own videos, but doing it in a way that's higher quality.
Yeah. And so, then, the reason they get into it is not because they believe in the conspiracies, but because they're really worried about this guy who they've been talking to, who they sort of like view as a friend now. And so I liked that. I like the way that they got invested in this, and the way that they got really sucked into the whole conspiracy thing was not because they initially just went like, oh, you're right, this is weird, we should research this. Like, there was a catalyst that had to happen for them to get into it, and it was something that was, more believable really than anything else.
Right. And again, like you said, it feels real. This feels like a logical kind of progression of the way things work. And yeah. I think one of the scariest things in this film, and this is something that has kind of always been in the back of my mind, is what if you make that one phone call one day that puts you on the wrong person's radar?
Yeah.
That is a terrifying prospect.
Well, yeah, and it's like one of those things where it's like, what if you're the person who accidentally learns too much about something that they shouldn't know anything about, You're the person who now knows something that you don't even know. You don't even know what you've seen, you don't know what you've read or what you've heard, but, somebody else is out there and all they see is a loose end that needs to be tied up. And that's you, and you have no idea that that's you. And it's
something as innocuous as you calling a number.
Sure, yeah. Or meeting somebody on the street, or, finding something, on the ground or in the trash or something like that. Just, it's that one thing where you just, you unknowingly and unwittingly, stick your nose where it doesn't belong, and now there's a target on your back type of situation. So it's an interesting thing to think about. I mean, it's not something that I think about or worry about all the time, but it's definitely something that exists, in the world. And I think it's a cool idea and a very interesting and original idea to, sort of make into a sort of horror thriller movie.
Well, let's take a break. We'll play the interview that I did with James Gilbert, and then we'll play the interview I did with Aaron Poole. We'll have some commercials, and when we get back, we'll finish up talking about the film. So how did you initially get involved with the film The Conspiracy?
Well, it was Aaron Poole, who is a fellow actor in Toronto here. I had been, an admirer of his work for a number of years, and then, one day in the audition room, I just went up to him. I introduced myself. I said that, I really like your work. I think that we have like a similar sort of like attitude towards, acting and sort of what we're interested in. And I'd love to at some point, grab a coffee and maybe discuss if you're up to anything. So we did. We went and later on had a coffee, and then it wasn't too long after that he was like, "I want you to take a look at this project that I'm trying to put together with my friend Chris." And it was The Conspiracy. And I read it, and I was like really intrigued by it. Obviously was interested with what they had planned for it. I was down in the States at the time, so I actually came back to Canada and then met up with Aaron, Chris, the director, and then Lee Kim, the producer on the project. And literally, Aaron and I did well over an hour's worth of improv at his house. And I think it was after that, Chris and, the whole creative team were like, yeah, I think this could be a really good balance of characters, and the dynamic is right. And then that was it. And then I got the gig, and then we went from there.
So kind of tell me a little bit about what it was like working on The Conspiracy versus other films, TV shows that you've been in, because the style of it is kind of so unique and stand out that I can only imagine it was a very kind of different set to be working on.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those, experiences as an actor that are so rare. The nature of the relationship that you had to craft, that Aaron and I had to craft. And it's, it's an independent production. So, there's that real team spirit, all hands on deck kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, throughout the process, you in order to do these characters justice, do the story justice, Aaron and I just became incredibly close, and you become incredibly close with your director, and there's an incredible amount of support and creative freedom in this project. You know what I mean? Because a lot of the times, we would be spinning these scenes. They were written, but very often they would spin into things completely different, and the camera would just be rolling. So that level of intimacy and trust and all of that was something that Chris really fostered, and I think everyone on the team understood. From everyone understood that, and there was that really cool unity on the project. I think very often, you work as a jobbing actor, and it's pretty utilitarian. You know what I mean? You go in and you do your job, but we were spending an incredible amount of time together, and discussing the themes and the subject matter of the project, at great length before we shot, while we were shooting. I came away from that project with this is a way. If every film could be like this, if every creative project could be like this, then that would be incredible. But as it is, this was a rare one, and but man, it was fantastic. You just can't express to you how galvanizing a great experience like that is. It can give you a lot of momentum and a lot of heart moving forward in a pretty challenging industry at times.
Well, and I think that a lot of that comes through on screen as well. I mean, it's the relationship between you and Aaron seems very real in the film, which obviously works to the film's benefit. So, but I think that's one of the better things about the film is that you actually have two characters that you're sympathetic towards, as opposed to a lot of the found footage faux documentary films where they don't exactly go out of their way to craft characters that are interesting. So
yeah, I think that there's interesting to watch the film and to kind of the one thing that I was really struck by is I think you see a very complex love between friends, you know what I mean? And you see this, the sort of the heartache when, when Jim starts to, drift away or pull back. And, that was the one thing that, you really, in a project like this, you couldn't even really plan it out. As we were filming though, the character relationship was starting to inform decisions, right? There would be things that Aaron would do the day before on set that would completely, surprise me or change, I would have a surprising reaction to it that would therefore influence, the scenes 3 or 4 down the shooting schedule. And I think that was the one thing that really crafted or really came out organically for me is the complexity of the relationship was sort of evolving as Aaron and I were evolving as fellow actors and as friends. So that was a really interesting dynamic to work with. And I think that when I watch my own performance, the one thing I'm struck by is, I was not really even conscious of crafting this, but of this profound sense of, letting my friend down, not being brave enough to face this, not being willing to face the consequences of this potential truth. And I find that that undercurrent of sorrow, when I watched it, I was like, that's really interesting. Because very often that was obviously just, me just being present, and that was bleeding through, even though I might have, consciously been going, oh, I'm playing this and doing this, but that seemed to be something that crept out a lot in the film, and I think is true and a really great element of the friendship that those guys have.
During the filming, kind of tell me a little bit about what it was like filming the first 2/3 of the film versus the last 2/3 or last third of the film, where your characters show up at the Tarsus Club initiation evening.
Well, I mean, as you can imagine, it was sort of as you might expect. The first half of the film that we were filming, and we shot pretty sequentially, actually. As I remember, like, it was a pretty sequential shoot. So at the top, it was like as it comes across, it's kind of like this like buddy movie or this buddy documentary style that we've become accustomed to. And it was learning, and it was genuine like inquiry, and like, how would we do this? How would we like film people who? How would we interact with people who we thought were maybe like mentally unstable or, not cognizant of reality? And then by the end, when we were moving towards the found footage stuff, it was genuinely really unsettling. It was like, you got to give it to Chris and the production team. They set up like an incredible environment for an actor to work in. Like, they basically tried to create an environment where this was as real as possible. So like, Poole and I are literally, sneaking to the house. All the background actors have been, told, not to acknowledge us, and so it was a genuinely stressful a stressful shoot to be a part of. And just like, working with Poole, and like, Aaron he's such a committed actor, and that just influences and really encourages, you to do to go that deep and to be that like raw in the scenes. So yeah, it was hair raising at times. Like, we were given only as much information as we needed to. It was always safe. It was always no one knew. It was never like we didn't know exactly what we were doing, but we only had the smallest amount necessary. So we were literally on edge trying to navigate the scene, and that was awesome. That was really put you in the moment. And yeah, I think as well, just like the natural drifting away of the relationship, between the two friends, it's just also a lot more, emotionally complex. And I remember feeling a real, generally remember playing the scenes like a fear and sadness, you know what I mean? That just happened to use, like, my friend is gone. I'm doing this to keep my friend, but I feel like I've lost my friend. And that was a really cool experience.
It feels more real than a lot of found footage films do, which, the way you're describing it, completely makes sense, and it makes sense that it worked so well.
And again, that goes back to, I think there was a real care taken in the production, and when Aaron and I were talking about the level of performance and the intimacy of it, we understood that this story, yes, is about conspiracies, but did need to be rooted. It did need to be rooted in these actual people and what was going on between them as they navigated this, this journey, this this going down the wormhole kind of thing. So across the board, I think that just the whole team understood that. So it wasn't just a kind of, I think that there can sometimes in these found footage things, the characters are, like you said earlier, you don't really understand who they are. They're kind of flippant. They're glib. You kind of, you, like you say, you kind of don't mind when they get taken out or whatever. So I think that was we understood that, and I think that was something we definitely strive for. As an entire, creative team.
At the end of the film, your two characters kind of have they get separated, and then Aaron ends up getting chased down, and you are brought to a room with your family in it. And then the end of the film is the Tarsus Club re-editing the footage of the kind of the events of the film. How do you feel about the ending of the film? Because I feel like the ending of the film is a pretty smart way of ending the film, because a lot of, again, found footage films come back to, and then both the characters die and somebody found the camera, which The Conspiracy feels very different in the way that it approaches how the film ends.
Yeah, I mean, I personally, I love the ending. I think that the ending is very smart. I think that it does what a lot of a lot of the conspiracy culture that is out there. There are always these ideas of these multiple layers of disinformation or manipulation. I think, I think there's a very definitive choice in what, Chris chose to do and how he, chose to end the film. That effectively, I've been co-opted and, threatened. And I think initially it was a lot more vague, in the script. And there just became a consensus that, there needs to be a bit of, a more strengthened, point of view on how the film's ends. So yeah, I mean, I think it's well done. I think that the research that I did into sort of the conspiracy cultures and different circumstances on the chat lines of like, oh no, that guy's definitely been co-opted. That guy's been brainwashed. No, you know what I mean? These levels, this sort of dialogue that exists out there, I think Chris was very aware of and definitely tried to layer that into the ending of the film. And it was interesting too, because it's like the Tarsus Club is, they're re-editing the story. They're but at the same time, they're manipulating the information, or they're manipulating the footage to sort of scare people off, but also they leave in, it's very clear that I'm in distress when I'm being interviewed, and, is this a warning? Is this, what is the ultimate, what is the ultimate message that Tarsus is sending back out to would-be people who go down this route of investigation? Again, it's great. I think it does make it stand. It does make its point, but it's also, if you let your brain go, there's multiple ways to interpret it. There's multiple different things that you can draw from the ending, and I think that that was very Chris was conscious of that when he did do that.
Yeah, I think the ending is really, I think it's really great. Again, I think it's a really novel and kind of unique way to end a found footage film, as opposed to just and everyone dies, the end. So
yeah, you're kind of. I mean, it does. It's and you also, you, again, saying with the sort of the human element of it all. It's just, I remember it being incredibly difficult scene to shoot when I'm doing the interview at the end, which, they keep going back and forth to. Again, the production did a great job. Like, they kept me isolated for a long time. They really put me through the ringer to get that level out of me. But yeah, I mean, it's just sort of the, whether or not you saw this final Judas moment, it's the final act of betrayal, in a way. And I think that in and of itself makes, gives the film it's sort of its tragic end. Yes, Aaron is, Aaron disappears, Aaron is dead, whatever you want to think, but the betrayal of Jim against his friend is, for me, as an actor and both watching the film again, it's, for me, I find that to be like the tragedy of the piece.
Yeah, because I mean, I interpreted it as Aaron is dead, and
oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure that there's any other interpretation in my mind, but I mean, I guess it could go.
No, he definitely did, but when Jim is like, yeah, he ran off. We don't know where he is. He's had a psychological breakdown. Whatever he's been coached to sort of to say. I guess that's what I was referring to.
Yeah. Well, and also another way that I personally interpreted the ending, and I was kind of curious, your kind of thoughts and the way it came through, is that your character ends up being part of the Tarsus Club.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, yeah, for sure. It's like one of those things where Jim will forever be part of the Tarsus Club. Jim will, maybe off the top have, he'll be freak the hell out, but slowly like job offers will come through, and then it'll be maybe like, it'll become clearer that maybe this isn't such a bad thing after all. You know what I mean? The things that you're able to convince yourself of, the veil you're able to like cast over, your life for, for comfort, for, your family. I mean, all these themes were being explored throughout the film. But yeah, that's definitely the case. It's the idea that Jim will always be indebted and owned and possibly, one day evolve into being a more active member of the Tarsus Club. And I think that that's sort of the insidious nature or the insidious suggestion of what the Tarsus Club does. So yeah, for sure.
So for you personally, I'm kind of curious, what is in your mind the most successful part of the film?
I have to say that there's, for me, it goes back to, and it's the part where, and maybe it's like, a series of scenes, but it's basically when Aaron moves in with me. And, we see a bit of Jim's home life and his newborn and his wife, and we see the collision of those worlds. And, we see, these two friends who are growing apart. The stuff with like the truck. I mean, it's for me one of the most beautifully shot moments of the piece is that when Aaron goes out into the street and runs after the SUV. And, Ian, our DOP, he did a great job of like catching that moment and keeping that steady cam moving, the lighting. And I just thought that was that becomes that's the change of the film, right? That's the, oh my God, Aaron is seeing things that aren't there. That's what Jim is saying. But at the same time, Jim knows something's up. Jim knows that there's something not right here, but he can't cross that threshold to believe that this could actually be happening. That for me, and all of those scenes we shot in the condo or the basement apartment, whatever we were filming at the time. I just remember those feeling incredibly weighted and difficult scenes to navigate, right? Because Aaron has crossed over. He is now like, there is a conspiracy. There is a monolithic sort of all-controlling entity out there, and you can't see that, then you are blind. You are willfully blind. And, as an actor, in those moments, it was very difficult to navigate because you're going, this is my friend. I think my friend might have had a psychological break. I need to tread very carefully here, even though what he is saying I instinctively know makes a lot of sense. But because of my societal conditioning, I can't go there. So that was a really interesting blend of emotions to sort of to tackle in those scenes. But I loved, the birthday party through when Aaron's brought the board back into the apartment. I'm having to whisper in the camera, to the camera because, it's like this guy, my best friend is now like living in my house. The pressure probably that my wife is putting on me. I love that sequence. I mean, obviously the found footage stuff at the end is exhilarating and really cool. But for me, I feel like that's the high point, right? Before the wave breaks on the other side. That's where like the tension is held, and then we break. Jim's gonna do it. Jim's gonna Jim's in. But that tension at the top there, I think that it was done really well, and I think in the edit they really made that work.
So obviously the film has been very well received. It was premiered at Fantastic Fest. Were you there when it premiered at Fantastic Fest?
I was not. No, I think I was actually shooting something else, and I couldn't make it. But Aaron went down, Chris went down, and I was definitely keeping in touch with them throughout the whole thing. And it sounded awesome. It was like, I think they had to add like 3 or 4 other screenings. They were all like packed. I think there was like a groundswell of the way that the film kind of scratched something in like the zeitgeist, and people wanted to know more about it and get Chris's thoughts, and so it was, although I wasn't there, it was really interesting, and I was pleasantly surprised that it had that reaction, which just goes to show that the subject matter is something people have a profound interest in.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, obviously the film has been pretty well regarded and pretty much critically everything that I've read. Do you think that a film like The Conspiracy hit with the audiences so well because I think people or because you think people have an inherent kind of yearning to, I don't know, talk about conspiracies and conspiracy theories and hidden agendas?
Yeah, I do. I think, and I don't know if it's necessarily like, I know that there's definitely, there's a conspiracy culture out there, and there's varying degrees of it, whether it's, it goes from Roswell to JFK to sort of, to stuff that is provable, like the manipulation of stocks by Enron or something like that. So the nature of what is conspiratorial is broad, and there's definitely we know that there's certain situations where those in power in broad daylight, and I think Terrence says that right, at the top of the film. It's like, there is manipulation in our culture. There is big business. There is big government doing things in relatively plain sight. They get caught and they're like, oh yeah, we were doing this, and then the culture kind of goes like, I don't really care. But I definitely think that there is something pervasive more and more in our culture where it might not be a conspiracy, but it's like we're being told one thing and a whole other layer is not being disclosed. And I think that no matter, that sort of anxiety, I personally believe to be true. And I think that most people, whether or not they want to like admit it or not, instinctively know that this is the case. So I think that when you have sort of like such a profound cultural anxiety about this sort of thing that we're being told, or this world that's being laid out for us or projected for us, can't be everything. I think that's what the film scratched on. So whether or not, like, you might think that that there's a lot of absurdity to these conspiracy theories, like what I call the conspiracy classic, but to a certain point, every person knows that there's, or has a sense, I think, a deep-rooted sense that not all is as it seems, that our government and institutions have been caught out, and will do things to sort of push forward different agendas. And I think that really, I think that kind of awareness that the film touched on, and like as I say, touched that nerve.
That's what makes the last third of the film so good, obviously, is because you buy in completely to the first 2/3 of the film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's been interesting. Like, I know I wasn't necessarily involved in this, but of course, like when the film was being first released, they had like a pretty good like online presence, trying like for the Tarsus Club, like the website that we go on in the film. Actually, there was a website that was the exact same website. I think Aaron and a couple other guys, maybe Chris, were on blogs trying to drum up the conspiracy of the Tarsus Club. So there was a relatively robust effort to try to obscure if this is real or not. Obviously, people catch on pretty quick once they see the film, but just trying to like permeate that into the culture online. I think that it just raised other questions, right? And of course, when you're promoting an independent film, you try to tackle every angle that can give you a little bit of heat. And an advantage of getting your film talked about. So yeah, I think those guys did a good job with that.
So I read that the director, who also wrote the script, kind of went down the rabbit hole of conspiracies. Was that something that you did as well to prep for the role?
Oh yeah, man. Like I spent a lot of time online and really going through all of these different online sites, and did tons of reading. Did tons of reading about JFK and try to wrapping my head around sort of the thought process. And there's an incredible amount of literature out there. There's actually we visit the spot in the film, and the guy is actually a real guy. The bookstore is called Conspiracy Culture. And if you go into that store, I think he's moved online now, but if you go into that store, he's like thousands and thousands of books that are as vast as, lizard people are running the U.S. government, to really subtle accounts of, the Gulf of Tonkin and Vietnam. Like, there's so much material out there. And I just did this really, I just jumped into everything. But there would become moments where you'd get really freaked out because you would be on these, you just keep falling into clicks, and you'd be on these, sites where all of a sudden, I'm listening to, this woman in Arizona kind of just, talk stream of consciousness about, the Illuminati and, alien life forms. I could feel this disconnect starting to arise as I was sort of saturating my brain with all of this information, and paranoia as well, so I had to take a bit of a step back and stop, staring into websites till 4 a.m, and take a little step back. But I'm glad I did that, because I think that gave, and I know Aaron did the same thing, it gave a real insight into, when you maybe can't, when there's something unexplainable, when there's something that you feel that is maybe amiss in your life, in society's life, if you feel this disconnect from your broader society, you feel like you don't have a place in it. Sometimes these sites, it's kind of well, of course that's what's happening. Of course that's why nothing makes sense. Of course why there's no spot for me in this world is because it's all inherently a lie. And now that I can go forth and find the truth, my truth, now I can live a more actualized existence, because I see and others don't. Others are blind and now I see. And that kind of fervor that a lot of the online communities have is kind of scary, but I also I understood the attraction of it. There's a zealotry for it, and sort of that, harnessing that notion of oh, I see and others don't. Oh, I'm awake, I'm enlightened, and other people are just sheep. It's a very, powerful sort of self-regard to start to inflame, and you could pick up on that on the online, and of course that's so well performed by Aaron as Aaron. It's I see, you don't, you're sheep. You'd rather just stick your head in the sand and go about and consume all the rest of it, and you can't even see the broader structure of this, dog and pony show. So yeah, I did all that kind of research, and it was important to kind of, for me to touch upon that. I think it really gave me a real kind of counterbalance of fascination and fright.
Have a hunger for horror? A yen for Yelp yarns? Then give your blood-curdled bones a boon and tune in to Chronicles from the Crypt. Join sordid slime slingers Casualty Chris and Father Malone as they take on HBO's groundbreaking television series Tales from the Crypt. Here's what the rotting and rancid rabble are saying about Chronicles from the Crypt. Tune in to Chronicles from the Crypt. You have nothing to lose except your life.
Who is Carl Kolchak?
He's a reporter.
Now that is news, Vincenzo. News! And we are a newspaper. We are supposed to print news, not suppress it.
With the INS.
What's an INS?
Independent News Service, sir. Founded in 1904 by Enrico Paluzzi.
who seems to have a nose for the strange and unusual.
Well, last year in Las Vegas, I uncovered a series of murders that turned out to have been committed by a vampire.
And what is the Kolchak Tapes?
It's a podcast.
All about Carl Kolchak.
What's a Kolchak?
The Night Stalker.
And where can you get it?
On iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and at www.kolchaktapes.com.
As foolish a game as any that Gory the Ghoul could make up.
Here's what some people are saying about the Projection Booth podcast.
Week after week, I'm mesmerized by the focus given great films and questionable films alike. But every episode is a learning and entertaining experience.
This is hands down the best movie podcast. They cover so many different genres across so many years, from obscure movies to blockbusters.
If there's only one podcast about movies and cinema that you listen to, make it this one.
The Projection Booth Podcast, with new episodes available every week at projectionboothpodcast.com.
In 1985, a curious phenomenon occurred. The Twilight Zone returned to television, featuring all new tales of mystery and imagination from the minds of Ray Bradbury, Harlan Ellison, George R.R. Martin, and Stephen King. Dreams for Sale, the Twilight Zone 85 podcast looks back at that land of shadow and substance and re-examines the groundbreaking successor to Rod Serling's legacy. Featuring new interviews with the show's creators and cast, Dreams for Sale can be found on iTunes and at twilightzone85.com. Dreams for Sale. We'll be waiting for you in the Twilight Zone.
Talk to me about your relationship with Christopher MacBride, the director and the writer of The Conspiracy, and kind of how he brought you in to work on the film with him.
Well, Chris MacBride and I went to high school together for grade 11, I think, before he left the school. And then he called me out of the blue almost 10 years later, I believe, and he had a stack of scripts that he hadn't ever shown anyone, and they were all brilliant in their own ways, vividly imagined, but too expensive to make first features out of. And so we got to talking about different things that might be possible for a first feature that he could go back in and write, and we share sort of a dread and a paranoia. At that time, it was mostly not unjustified, but unsubstantiated paranoia with regards to, global politics and whatnot. And so Chris went away and designed the first draft of The Conspiracy, and then, of course, I read it, and the rest just kind of snowballed. It was dread-filled and horrific, and it was pretty easy to get made. I think it was about a year between the first draft and us going to camera after a lot of workshopping.
So did you see the script in kind of its earlier forms? Is it pretty close to what ended up on the screen? Were there a lot of changes?
The script had some changes, as all do, but its sort of forward momentum, its politics, its transcendent fear were intact in the first draft, definitely. I think what workshopping it with actors and then with real people did was added a clearer heart and sort of human impact. And ultimately, it's the combination of the politics and the human impact that I think make it a special film. It's rare that I love films that I'm in, but this is one that I do.
Talk to me a little bit about working with your co-star, Jim, and kind of founding that relationship in front of and behind the camera.
Yeah, I mean, Jim, I didn't really know well before The Conspiracy came up. We had met through the Toronto acting scene only briefly, and then I went and took a look at his work, and he's become one of my closest friends, and I think he's definitely one of my favorite actors. He's super talented, and so it was easy for us to imagine having had an old friendship. And of course, we were building characters for The Conspiracy, but we also, as a part of the pseudo-documentary aspect, were creating aspects of self that were sort of parallel to our real lives. So we were able to keep some real and build a lot of fiction around and through the story. So it was quite easy to imagine him as my best friend at that point. And of course, he's become one of my best friends, which is a nice thing.
So, obviously Chris finished the script, were you initially kind of on his radar? Did he want you involved in the actual film, or just as a sounding board for the script?
Yeah, no, from the beginning, we knew that we were going to work together as director and actor. And I've got a lot of story experience as a creative producer and as a story editor. And so I was helping him construct sort of the architecture of the story, but also knew that I was going to, from the beginning, the character's name was Aaron.
Yeah, because I was going to say, your characters are named after yourselves.
That's right. That's right, yeah. And it helps build sort of the verisimilitude when it entered the culture. Really, the film, for me, in a time before fake news existed as a phrase, the film is about, whether the narrators of our story are reliable, and whether all stories can be things that we trust. Who do we go to for real information? And so we knew that a part of the sort of performance of the film would be whether, these people were real or not, and questioning what was real and what was not.
Chris MacBride, he mentions that he fell into kind of the rabbit hole of conspiracy theories, writing and preparing the script. Did you follow suit in that rabbit hole?
Definitely. It was difficult at that time to find things outside of, sites like InfoWars and similar conspiracy-minded sort of strongholds. There was no such thing as the NSA dump at that point. I think WikiLeaks was in its infancy, if I'm remembering my dates correctly. So it was difficult to find tough journalists doing stories on global organizations that sort of create consensus and manufacture consent. And so when you're researching this stuff on the net without any sort of reliable narrators, your head gets all messed up, and you're filled with fear and paranoia, and you really have only your own moral compass to go by. But even that starts to fall into question. What is it that I was raised to believe, and who's telling me what now? So that became pretty apparent that we were all kind of suffering from that, and in a way, our entire culture is suffering from that now. Who do you rely on? Who can you trust?
Yeah, the film was a little bit ahead of its time in certain respects. Kind of.
Yeah. In some respects, it's been a while since I watched it, but I know there's a section about that sort of looks at the global surveillance, and in many ways that section is likely dated because it doesn't acknowledge sort of the NSA dump and WikiLeaks and Assange in a way that's current.
So I'm curious. You born and raised in Canada, correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. So in America, obviously, as you know, there seems to be a culture of conspiracy theory because of a lot of the kind of the insane stuff that's happened in American history. Is that as prevalent in Canada?
It is. It's not. Well, I don't know if you could say it's as forward in popular dialogue. Certainly, our news media, the established news media, is not as advanced, and I don't mean that to sort of be a synonym for sophisticated, but it's not. Our problems with conspiracy theory is not as advanced as the problems with conspiracy theory are in the States. From Canada, I feel like it's a real problem, and I'm not trying to be arch or holier than thou. We do have a creeping culture of tabloid journalism that is wading its way into politics. There's a consortium of newspapers that are partly owned and funded by the Koch brothers and by the guy who owns the National Enquirer that have recently become strong mouthpieces for conservatism and vague alt-right messaging. So I can see a future where we're struggling with it as much as America is. And please, if you sort of disagree with my sort of political morality on that, do challenge me. I'm not trying to be holier than thou, but I do see that sort of system of news media as a problem because lies are not qualified or called out.
Well, I completely agree with you on that. Also, lies are bipartisan, which doesn't help anyone.
Right. Yeah. It sows chaos, and I do think that it's sowing chaos is a part of a global agenda by people who are more sophisticated than the mouthpieces that they're using.
As an American, I'm curious, do you have kind of one or two big conspiracies in Canada?
No, our English culture has always been co-opted by the British and the Americans because, in part, pop culture has been fed to us by you guys and by the UK. So within Canada, even knowledge about our own politics is less than what we might know about JFK or 9/11 or Roswell. So if people say, what are the biggest, and ask Canadians, what are the biggest conspiracy theories, it would probably name American ones. But that doesn't suggest that we aren't as blind to, the things that are going on, because there's plenty of stuff that Canadians have been responsible for, let's say as regards to global mining, that people don't know anything about, and in some ways, that's a conspiracy of silence.
Yeah, that's kind of what I assumed. Your answer was going to be, because I feel like the American conspiracy theories really, I don't know why, but they enrapture everyone everywhere. I mean, the JFK assassination is it's a cultural touch point for, I guess not just Americans.
No, yeah, it isn't. It's global. And I don't know. There's a lot of reasons for that. I think maybe the convergence of kind of idealism as represented by the American dream and global communications and the sophistication of Hollywood stories. That all happened there and went global. So, we all have opinions on that shit.
Yeah. No, I'm with you on that 100%. So, kind of getting back to fictional conspiracies in quotations.
Yeah.
So, Jim Gilbert is cast. You two kind of started a relationship, kind of becoming friends, off screen beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of take me through what it was like working with him and with Chris, and kind of at the beginning of the film, where it's very much a faux documentary, a mockumentary, maybe, as you could say, versus the end of the film, which is very much found footage. Your character ends up getting murdered, in quotations. Kind of, what was that like, the juxtaposition of the two kind of filming styles for you?
I mean, it was fun to build the investigation through talking head interviews and sort of more contained documentary footage where we turn the cameras on ourselves in our interview. It built our character's view of the investigation as it was unfolding, as we built a relationship with Terrence and built a relationship to sort of these types of conspiracies. And once it exploded beyond the bounds of our living room, it was something that obviously the camera and the hidden cameras started to capture, and it really started to snowball. And it felt more like a bigger film for us as actors, but then as characters, it also it sort of felt like the shit was hitting the fan. I mean, when it was a real mansion with 100+ extras, white men in suits, and so that in and of itself is terrifying.
Yeah, no, I can only imagine. I mean, for me, one of the more kind of startling scenes in the film is the initiation scene, because the tension really mounts in that scene, kind of to a head, with your character trying to kind of get at Jim's character to kind of warn him that they may be in danger. I was talking with Jim, and he mentioned that the extras weren't supposed to acknowledge you two as anyone other than they weren't supposed to give you any sort of different treatment, which helped kind of create more realism in the scene.
Yeah, I mean, when we were mingling before there was any sort of final revelation, we were treated like new initiates, and we walked in and amongst, and our sort of production had created faux hidden cameras. So we would kind of do our blockings with Ian Anderson, our DP, sort of stuck right in front of us, and we would kind of have our hands on his shoulder and just guide him through the crowd as our characters would have mingled. And for the most part, people just sought to create the illusion that we were just another initiate, which it's unnerving, man. It was everyone's standing around in suits and masks, and there's this kind of threatening high class masculinity that pervaded that whole party. It was an incredible experience as a human being to have created a sort of an experience like that. And then you say you liked the initiation that was done in a tent surrounded by torches down at the bottom of this long grassy hill. I mean, that was all real. What we shot, there weren't multiple locations. So it's this tent surrounded by torches by a lake, and it's populated with red-robed priests and sabers, and it was really it was transporting and terrifying.
Talk to me a little bit about the end chase sequence.
Well, the one area that was shot separately was when we were actually in the woods. There was a kind of a small stand of trees at the mansion that I could run into, but once we got into the thick of the woods, that was another location. But I can say that standing at the bottom of the hill, having just emerged from the tent, and do you guys do spoilers? Maybe I should avoid it, but having emerged,
go right.
Yeah, having emerged from the tent, seeing that I was wearing the bull mask and seeing 100 extras in robes and masks bare their daggers and run towards me on the hill was the single most scary moment of my life. Your body, even though you're acting, your body just reacts as an animal would. My entire being was saying run, but the script is to stand and try to yell reason and excuse and defense, and then just finally I was able to take off. And I mean, it was an exhilarating experience and terrifying one.
Yeah, no, that scene in the film is pretty horrifying. The scene where they run right at you. It's it does its job, let's put it that way.
Yeah, and that's I think why a fake documentary about conspiracy is sort of exalted to horror status, because the politics just becomes so personal that it is horrific.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the end of the film. It turns out right at the end, in the kind of the epilogue, that your character wasn't murdered and was returned, but changed by the whole experience at the Tarsus Club. Was that always the original ending, that your character was going to disappear?
Well, it's interesting that that's your interpretation. Certainly, I think it can be said that the entire film itself has been co-opted by Tarsus.
Right. Well, that would be my interpretation of the film is that everything that we're seeing in the film is what we're meant to see by the kind of the bigger hand, the one hand moving the other hand, if that makes sense.
Exactly, it does make sense. And so that being said, they stop short of an explicit admission of murder. You never see Aaron again. They say he's being converted, but you also never see the human again.
Yeah.
So, just to be explicit, the dude's dead.
Yeah, well, that's what I assumed.
Okay, cool. I couldn't.
No. I don't like ruining that. Your character got murdered. He went. Well, the way the script makes it sound like is he came back and then he was murdered.
Yeah, it's elaborate.
Yeah,
it's you saw it happen. You saw it happen. We saw it happen.
I mean, that's what Jim's character says, but at the same time, like, I have a hard time believing that that's what happened.
And that's what's so spectacular, I think, about Chris's film. Like, I mean, when most filmmakers create ambiguity, it's through a lack of skill. But I can say of Chris that every element in this piece was controlled. This guy's writing massive films right now, and his imagination is incredibly complicated. But he knew that for his first film, he had to just put it into complicated story and something that could be executed for a small amount of money. And most of that complication has been in this careful sleight of hand. So the messaging in that epilogue is really around sort of muddying the waters of what we just saw with our own eyes. We just heard and saw murder with our own eyes. And yet a couple people delivering alternative stories allows us to feel confusion around what we saw with our own eyes. And I mean, that's why the film is still something that people want to talk about, because that's exactly what happens every single day in our news.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, again, it's one hand is moving another hand, and we're being told that there's only one hand and no one else is involved.
It's amazing, though, most of the calls that I get, and they're from the UK, not calls, but notes through social media, is a need from people to get clarification around the end. Because and we really just want to know, even though we saw and heard something with our own eyes, we really want to know what happened. And a lot of people, actually, and very young people, don't even know that this is a fake documentary. And so they have confusion around the end in a way that, maybe somebody who's consuming it as fiction might not.
I think that's really great, though, right? Wouldn't you consider that a massive success of the film if it does make any viewer question the reality of the film?
I agree. The intention from the beginning, when I received the first draft from Chris, we agreed that we wanted to create a modern legend. And he sent me a number of years ago now, but just a year after the film came out, a YouTube link from a very popular conspiracy show. I can't remember who the host is, but the host was ranting against people who believe that Tarsus is real. And just how foolish they are. And, I think that that's a little harsh, considering a lot of people get their information from the internet. Tarsus has now invaded the internet as a possibly real sort of men's social club. And so, yeah, it really has sort of lived up to his promise of becoming like a modern legend.
And I think that that's really kind of nuts, is fiction crafting fact and kind of shaping the actual exterior world versus just being self-contained.
And it's irresponsible now. I mean, I would feel, I didn't think we lived in a world where, we would be able to sort of invade people's sense of reality to the extent that we have. But clearly Chris was operating off the same impulses that the global intelligence services have been. He just happened to be using it for different reasons. It really is sort of a microcosmic view of what's happening on a bigger stage now.
Yeah, the film, like I mentioned before, it was a little bit ahead of its times in more ways than one, for sure. Especially with the use of kind of changing the narrative mid-swing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's, I think, what I like most about it. That's what I appreciate most about it, Chris's skill in adopting that. And I love hearing that. Like, I do really appreciate that you got something out of it. I love that people still want to talk about it. I still want to talk about it. It's shocking.
Well, talking about conspiracy theories is, it's one of those things where they're never going to go away. And ever since the mid 90s was the thing that I grew up on that kind of fueled my conspiracy theory kind of interest was the X-Files. And so I'm inherently drawn to stuff like The Conspiracy because I'm inherently drawn to conspiracy theories as it is.
I think that at the time Chris was figuring out what to write for us, Loose Change was the single most watched thing on YouTube, and I don't know where it stands now. PewDiePie has probably got videos where they're fucking up there, but excuse my French. But yeah, I think that X-Files and sort of these self-produced features really have created an entire generation of people who want to believe.
Well, and The Conspiracy is right in that same kind of wheelhouse because you asked at the beginning of the interview, I'm not sure, for me personally, what sphere The Conspiracy operates within, because I think labeling it as this is just a horror movie, I think that does the film a massive disservice.
It doesn't set people upright, that's for sure. If I invite you to the fire saying that I'm going to tell you a horror story, I think you'd be disappointed. You'd be disappointed because the expectations are set differently, and the film unravels in a way that is a lot different from the typical films in that genre. So, yeah, it does do the film a disservice, but we've never really known how to position it. It's just kind of sitting there now on the net, and I'm quite happy for it to be pirated as much as it has, because in a way it finds its own way.
Well, it being pirated it's being pirated by the audience that
wants it. Yeah,
totally, sure.
Totally, man.
You went with Chris to Fantastic Fest to premiere the film.
That's right. Yeah, and the reception was amazing. It was really exciting to sort of be with it for the first time. We had taken a trip while the film was in gestation to the first Tea Party rally in Washington, D.C. To see if we could get some extra footage that might be useful. I don't think anything ended up making the final cut, but it was a fascinating parallel to have gone to D.C. for the first. I think they were protesting Obama's Obamacare. It wasn't called Obamacare at that point. But it was interesting to have that trip parallel the trip down to Austin with the completed film, and to be with that audience was an amazing beginning. We knew that there was going to be a place for it.
And kind of the reaction from the audience, they were all very positive, very excited.
It was kind of a slow burn, like you said, it's difficult to contextualize, and in many ways, horror and fantasy festivals set up the wrong expectations for the audiences. Obviously, the bread and butter are, movies like The Void, the Halloween remakes, stuff like that, Blade Runner. So this Conspiracy was a bit of a slow burn for the audiences, but our screenings were filled, and then the buzz just began to build after that.
Well, again, I think, like you said, it inevitably finds its audience. Which is a good thing.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I can't begin to imagine trying to classify the film, because, I mean, again, it's like you said, it's calling it a horror movie is a disservice, but I don't know. I mean, the setup for the film is so strong that it helps kind of permeate everything else in the film.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'd agree. I'd agree with that. Chris really worked hard to create like an online documentary, with this sort of cheap video stock footage and talking head interviews and lots of sort of synth music. And so he worked hard to create that aesthetic that we expect as almost like an intellectual, moral basis for what was to come. And so I agree. I think he was really successful in that, At TIFF this year, I heard an interview with the new Midnight Madness programmer, Peter Kaplowski, and he talked about how his idea of a midnight movie wasn't the same as it had been in past years. That what was the most important thing to him in a midnight movie was that it was transgressive, that it took our expectations and moved them aside and subverted much of our expectations. And I do think that if you're going to call The Conspiracy anything, it's a transgressive pop film.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that this is really an unfortunate moniker, but I feel like found footage kind of gets a dirty name.
Oh, for sure it does, because it's cheap and it shows.
Yeah, and a lot of the films have the same ending, which doesn't help. I mean, they're very predictable. I mean, how do you kind of get yourself out of this box that you've put yourself in of, well, how do we find the footage? Well, the characters all died, the end.
Yeah.
And it's become kind of expected. And then you have a film like The Conspiracy that really operates outside of those expectations and also really makes you work for it, getting to that found footage part to begin with.
Yeah, it's really just one of the styles it employs.
Yeah, for sure. Because it's definitely not the focus of the film. I would say that the focus of the film is presenting itself as a documentary more than anything else.
Yeah, I agree. A fake documentary with like a found footage third act.
Yeah, found footage kicker for sure.
Yeah.
For yourself, what is your favorite kind of part of the film?
The final found footage stuff would not feel as dreadful without sort of the first act. And I'm biased, but I think that moment when we see the bull mask in the mirror, all paths have led to that image. And for me, that's true cinema. When everything we've heard and seen and suspected coalesce in one moment, that's, to me, a true climax. And that's a testament to Chris's filmmaking. I mean, I'm just about to start his second feature, which was a long time coming because he's been writing movies for lots of fancy other people. But this is only the second film he got to direct. But his skill as a director will be seen to be, I think quite special once he's working in something a little bit more obviously fictional. That moment with the bull mask showed his craft, and it's my favorite part of the movie.
It was kind of also one of the more inevitabilities of the film, right? I mean, it's an inevitability that someone is going to wear the bull mask.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things that you expect, but it's still surprising when you see it. And so it touches all these places at the same time. It's like just a real holy shit moment.
Yeah, and that like you said, that moment when he looks in the mirror is just, it's like, oh shit.
Yeah, and we're excited and terrified.
Yeah, because where you inherently know, because again, like you said, you've been set up that you know where this is going.
Exactly. Yeah, from the first interview with was he a U of T professor on mythology, we get that the bull is slain, and it's academic at first, and then it gets intellectual, and then it gets kind of sort of pop conspiracy, but then it gets physicalized and realized in our lead characters, and it really is like that perfect sort of meeting point of all paths.
So, for you personally, how do you kind of feel the film has aged in the last couple years? Is it kind of aged well? Has it become more prescient?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, like I said, I haven't seen it for a while. I know that certain pieces could have its information updated. There had not been any major whistleblower events when we made the film. So that stuff could be updated because it hasn't aged well. But I think its implications are more relevant now than when we made it. It was cautionary when we made it, and now it plays as just an extension of sort of our fear of what's happening now.
Yeah, it was like I said before, I feel like it's a little ahead. It was a little ahead of its time.
Definitely. And that's Chris. That's Chris MacBride. He's an oracle.
Well, and I mean, a lot of the credit in my mind of the film being so, absolutely phenomenally compelling is the relationship between you and Jim feeling so real. And
that's cool. That's nice.
Well, I mean,
nice to hear.
For found footage films or horror films in general or films in general, if you're not invested in the main characters, like, why even make the movie?
Completely agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that's why it's so rare for me to like films that I'm involved in. The authenticity is rare, and so this is that exception. And so yeah, I'm really happy that Jim and I were able to find something human in that remarkable construct that MacBride made.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, I think it comes through on screen for sure because it's just the performance, your performances working off of one another really kind of knock it out of the park and make it something that you get invested in the first 2/3 of the film.
Thanks so much, man.
We're talking about found footage horror films. We're talking about found footage films. Other than obviously The Conspiracy, are you a fan of that kind of subgenre of film at all?
I don't pursue subgenres for themselves. I definitely haven't watched every found footage, but in researching the film, we wanted to see sort of what devices worked and what didn't. But it was in the years afterward that I found, this is a guilty secret because I know so many people dislike the film, but it's I think it's called Unfriended. Is that the one that takes place all on a computer screen?
Yeah, that movie is actually, I think that movie's pretty good. I
honestly, in terms of, like, to me, that's true found footage, and it conjured the type of paranoia, if looking at a computer screen in a dark room with your back to the door, that I thought was pretty subtle and sublime. Right? It's not an easy thing to do, and I thought they did it well. I know there's a sequel now. I haven't seen it.
Yeah, I think the sequel had like different endings if you went and saw it in certain theaters or something to that effect. Each print of the film had each print of the film had like 2 or 3 alternate endings. Yeah,
interesting, very interesting, huh? Yeah, I mean it relied on sort of the tropey ending as well, and but I just dug it. Maybe I was in the right mood for it that night, but I just remember really digging it.
Well, I mean, similarly to The Conspiracy, it's not just a bunch of people out in the woods with a camera. And, that to me is always the one conceit of found footage films that I always have the hardest time wrapping my head around. And I would feel like if you're writing it, it's the hardest way as to how do you justify having the camera going at all times?
Yeah, it's one of the most obvious sort of cliches when you're looking at scripts like that. Like I've of course read a lot of found footage scripts since The Conspiracy, and it's just so hard to say yes to them because that basic cliche is something people find difficulty getting around.
Right, and in The Conspiracy makes perfect sense. It works in the film's favor.
Yeah,
that the kind of the expectations are subverted, and then like you mentioned in Unfriended, that too works because again it's doing something completely different with why are the cameras constantly rolling?
Yeah,
answer that question without it being something really goofy.
Yeah, because it really does usually make the character holding the camera seem like an utter sociopath. Like, why the hell are you not helping your friend?
Why haven't you put the camera down and run away?
Yeah, exactly.
Which I heard that Chris MacBride, and was it you as well, did a lot of online kind of advertising and kind of like forum stuff for the conspiracy, right?
Yeah, it's so great getting these questions because I'd forgotten a lot of this. We had sort of multiple persona that we were using on InfoWars and other chat rooms to build the legend of Tarsus and feed people towards the websites. And again, like I feel like that kind of that kind of work is almost immoral at this point because it's exactly what the Koch brothers are doing with these like fake, moms for, education type pseudo grassroots organizations. So it's really, we just did what is being done now, but for entertainment reasons.
Well, it's kind of like those ARG things that they did for Batman, The Dark Knight, stuff like that, right? I mean, you gotta drum up interest, and I mean it's an indie film, so it's not like the studios are throwing it on the local news at 5:00 in the afternoon with a trailer. So
it's true, but from current politics, we've learned that a lot of people are forming their opinions just by staring at their computer screens and going on these alternative sites. So I don't feel bad having done it, but now I'd have to question whether I'd want to manipulate the minds of like usually younger people, because as I said before, it's young people usually from the UK who are sending me notes asking how much of it is real and like, how come I'm not dead and things like that. And I now used to say the politics are real, but a lot of the story was not. I used to say that, but now I'm very clear about the fictionalization. And if they're interested in looking into Bilderberg Group and Trilateral Commission and stuff like that, you can research them here and I'll send them links. But we just have to, that's one of the ways that the conspiracy has aged. I think that the handling of it by the makers needs to be a little bit more clear and responsible because, people are educating themselves online and it has real world implications for usually poor people.
Well, you guys, it was a little bit of wielding fire.
Totally. Yeah.
That was kind of the thing that I took away from the film is that every time they said the Tarsus Club, I just assumed it was the Bilderbergs.
Yeah. Definitely that was the chief model. There's a Trilateral Commission, and then obviously people will recognize the Bohemian Grove stuff as well when it comes to the actual ritual. There were a lot of references, but Bilderberg, I think, was the primary political one.
Which, again, it's a conspiracy that I personally don't feel like enough people have heard about.
Oh, well, it's not even a conspiracy. It's real. They meet and they trade information and make agreements outside of the eye of the electors. So it's, it's insane.
It's a conspiracy, but not really.
It's.
So we're going to finish up talking about the conspiracy. So I'm curious, Eric, and this will be a little bit of a tangent, but again, kind of in keeping in line. And this is, again, something that I know both of us are rather passionate about. I don't know how passionate one could really be about conspiracy theories. What is kind of your conspiracy theory of choice?
A friend of mine was really into chemtrails for a while.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and I would make fun of him constantly for it. But he had some compelling arguments where I went like, okay, so that argument doesn't sound completely crazy, but you're still wrong, and chemtrails are still not a thing. I don't really have one. I don't know. Is Bigfoot a conspiracy theory? I don't think he is.
But did you know that they're turning the fucking frogs gay? That man's not even on YouTube or iTunes or PayPal anymore, folks. But, we're keeping his idiocy alive by bringing up the fact that he at one point said, ladies and gentlemen, they're turning the fucking frogs gay with gay bombs in the water.
Whatever, dude. Let the frogs fuck whoever they want. I don't really give a shit. But I think there's a lot of things surrounding some historical events like 9/11 and like similarly timed like gigantic catastrophic world events over the last 100 or so years.
How about what happened at Waco? Because that's kind of it's similar to 9/11. But I feel like it's less incendiary than 9/11, if that makes sense.
I don't know. I don't really know too much about Waco to like really have an opinion on it, one way or the other.
I like Waco. I think that's an interesting conspiracy theory. One that's more recent, what happened in Vegas last year. That one's strange. A lot of kind of weird stuff around that.
There's definitely like some information that came out afterwards where it was like, so wait, what?
Maybe it's like miscommunication. Maybe it's just bad timing. Or maybe there is more to it. And that's kind of the thing with conspiracy theories. That's the more interesting notion of the conspiracy theory, is not the conspiracy theory itself, but why are you believing the conspiracy theory? Like, what is motivating you personally and internally to really question the official, in quotations, story?
Sure, yeah. And there's lots of reasons to question it. Sometimes things just seem too perfect to be random,
Well, and that's something that when I was in high school, one of the more kind of influential people in my life growing up when I was in school was a professor, we didn't call him that in high school, a teacher I had in high school who told me to question everything. And, question everything, because there's always, there may be something in the background, but question everything, don't take everything at face value. And that's something I've taken to heart, really, because it's an important aspect of being, human is, everyone has a reason to say something and there's always a motive. Even if they're not forthright with the motive, there is a motive.
Yeah, the official story is not always the truth. And sometimes just because something sounds crazy or you don't have evidence to back up, what you believe doesn't mean that it's not true. But it is an interesting situation, it's like we want to believe the official story because, if we don't want to believe that our government or, the media or whatever, or, the people in the higher ups, wherever you are, or the people feeding you information are lying to you, because if they are, then what else are they lying about, type of thing. So it's one of those things where it's a lot of times a lot easier to not question things, because if you start to question things, it's very easy to fall down a rabbit hole where you just now don't believe anything at face value. And that's a hard way to exist in the world. I think.
And that's go ahead.
No, a healthy dose of skepticism and, use your own brain and your own judgment and sort of decide for yourself if something, seems believable or, maybe is not quite on the up and up. But, it's one of those things where, maybe, I don't know, maybe all the fucking shit with Donald Trump and him getting elected and the whole Russia thing and all of that stuff, like, God.
Honest to God, I'm not sure how much of a conspiracy theory that is.
I don't.
Well, no, I'm not saying that. I honestly, and this is just me, I don't really care at this point. You notice how no one's brought it up in a while. And you know why that is? Because for me, and I am not a Donald Trump supporter in any form or fashion.
But at this point, we can't do anything about it. So.
But my thinking is that it was an easy way to shift blame away from the real reason Donald Trump is president. It's that a political party became so fractured that they were unable to get their entire kind of their constituents behind their candidate, albeit a terrible candidate. If you believed Hillary Clinton was a good candidate, you were only saying that because you knew Donald Trump was a worse candidate.
Well, no, this is one of those things where it was like all of the candidates were terrible. Everybody was bad. It was maybe the worst showing of an election ever. There is maybe not more than two people in the whole process, from the beginning, that I would have even remotely wanted to vote for. Making
open-ended promises to people on stuff you can't deliver just because that's the easy way to get support is not the way to go about doing it either.
Yeah, but that's what every, candidate has done since forever, because, everybody's got to make big sweeping promises because that's the stuff that sells tickets and sounds good and gets people, excited or whatever. But
and in the generation that exists now with the soundbite generation, it's the easiest way to get people excited is, I heard this. It's a Facebook generation.
Yeah.
Clickbait generation.
Yeah, it's everything is, taken out of context. Nobody's watching, the whole speech. Everybody only gets little clips and sound bites and what somebody says, two different news organizations will use in different contexts to sort of spin in their own sort of way or whatever. So I mean, I don't know. It's an interesting thing. It's one of those, I mean, I don't know. It's one of those situations where, who knows in like 5 years when we look back at this time and we go like, wow, that was fucking insane that like shit was that crazy and fucked up that like we had a game show host as our president for a while and like, what the fuck?
I think that this is just the beginning.
Unfortunately, I tend to agree with you that, it's, we're getting closer and closer to another movie that may be proven to be a documentary. Idiocracy.
Don't say Idiocracy. See, and here, you know what? Idiocracy is such a bad example.
Because I'd rather have President Camacho.
Oh, well, also because I think that if we were to become like that, we would be exponentially stupider.
Oh,
but
yeah.
Again,
no,
I don't think that would ever happen because of people like you, people like me, people like a lot of folks in this world who exist and know to push back against stuff like that. Obviously,
sure.
We're not exactly gaining a lot of ground, but at the same time, we're not giving up either. And again, when you have something like what happened in 2016 with Donald Trump becoming president, let's not forget again that this country, and back to conspiracy theories and to the film, talking about in this film, something that has happened and, the bigger NWO world order. Let's not forget that the US government actively meddled in tons of foreign elections and will continue to.
Oh, yeah, for forever.
Right. And yet we sit here on our high horse saying, how dare someone possibly do that to us? And again, no one has talked about the Russia thing in fucking God knows how long at this point. I don't even know if the Mueller investigations are even going on anymore because it's not. Brett Kavanaugh took up the airwaves for like a month, and I haven't heard a damn thing about it. So for all I know, it's not even going on. I have no fucking clue. But let's not pretend like our government is above being meddled with because we have taken it upon ourselves to meddle in other countries constantly.
Oh yeah, all the time.
This is not a conspiracy theory. This is real.
This is real,
happening.
yeah.
This is a known thing. They've made movies about it.
Yeah, so, I mean, I don't know. It's, when you see this stuff, essentially, I mean, this isn't a political podcast, but this movie sort of brings it out, sort of tangentially just because of the nature of the subject matter. To sort of bring it back to the conspiracy, it's, with all the stuff that's happening in real life, that's not even conspiracy, that's just like on the news every day, and you go, wow, this is real, this is happening, holy shit, did you ever believe that like this is the kind of stuff that we would be seeing on the news on a regular basis? It's, God, if you have a questioning bone in your body, it really makes you think like, what else is real,
Yeah. And that's what's scary about this movie. Christopher MacBride, I didn't get a chance to speak with him, but I did read a lot of kind of interviews with him, and Aaron Poole and James Gilbert obviously echoed this in our interviews, that they got into character and Christopher MacBride got into writing this script because he went down that rabbit hole of YouTube and, GeoCities websites and these kind of like these kind of websites that deal with conspiracy theories and kind of, alternate theories on stuff. And it is, if you go and look on the internet for any period of time, you too will get kind of enraptured into these conspiracy theories. And that's not a bad thing.
I couldn't tell you how many times that I have gone sleepless just from going down the rabbit hole on like stupid YouTube videos or whatever, like we've been talking about. You watch a 10-minute thing on how somebody's like, oh, this is what they're actually putting in your water, and you're like, that's pretty
they put fluoride in the water. That's a thing.
That's a real thing, and we drink it, and why?
They can't really, they can tell us, but like the answer is never, in my mind, the answer is always just kind of nebulous at best.
Yeah, it's sort of like one of those things like, oh, it's good for your teeth. Like, well, I don't need it because I brush my teeth twice a day. Like,
and I also go to the dentist.
I haven't been to the dentist in like 5 years, but that's because I'm like afraid of the dentist, but.
Give me a fucking break.
It's like one of those things where it's like, you just don't go for a while. And then like, now I'm just afraid to go because like, I know my teeth are probably fucked up because it's been so long. I don't know. They don't hurt or anything, and I brush my teeth all the time, so it's I'll go in when there's a problem.
Again, that the fluoride in the water, that's like you mentioned, the fluoride in the water, that's a common one.
Chemtrails.
Chemtrails. I mean, I think chemtrails is. I don't know how I feel about chemtrails. I feel like chemtrails may even be just kind of like I will listen to someone, but it's kind of diminishing returns. Same with like flat Earth. Flat Earthers. I'm not going to say someone's an idiot for believing in something, but you'd be hard-pressed for me to believe that flat Earth is reality.
Yeah, if you're a flat earther, I'm going to call you an idiot because just science. That's why.
Well, don't forget, and I'm not saying that flat Earth is true, but don't forget that at one point in this thing we call humanity, the human beings thought that the sun revolved around the Earth.
Right. Yeah.
I'm not saying that the Earth is flat, but we also used to think that the sun revolved around the Earth.
Right. No. I mean, we used to think a lot of things, We used to think that, I don't know.
I used to have faith that this country wouldn't elect someone like Donald Trump.
Oh.
Yet here we are, folks.
Sick Trumpy burn, dude. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, God, you go back, 100 years ago, like really at the dawn of modern medicine or whatever, and all the weird shit that they used to do to people to like treat illnesses and like what we do now.
Drill a hole in their skull. They thought that they were possessed by demons.
Yeah. You go back a little further than that, like honestly, not that far. And instead of believing that people were sick or mentally ill or whatever, people thought that people were possessed or people were witches or, demons and things like that. And they just murdered people.
Well, look, back in the 90s, the late 80s, early 90s, the Satanic Panic.
Satanic Panic, yeah.
And yeah. I fell way down the Satanic Panic rabbit hole recently. I went back and rewatched Paradise Lost 2, and Paradise Lost 3, and West of Memphis. And I'm listening to the audiobook about the West Memphis 3, and modern day witch hunt. Same thing.
Yeah. I mean, and then you can go down a weird, God, what's that? What were those like tests that they did on the kids in like the 60s with all the weird psychotropic drugs and stuff?
You're talking about MK Ultra?
Yeah.
Dude, the kind of the long lasting effects of MK Ultra are like the insanity behind that is you will never know. I mean, I honestly don't think MK Ultra ever stopped, and there's stuff to show it didn't. It just got a name change.
And that's the kind of stuff, like there is evidence that something like that existed, but like, did it exist in the capacity that we think that it did?
Or was it way worse?
Or was it way worse? Or was it like not quite as bad as we think that it was? And like, I mean, I don't know. And that's MK Ultra is probably my favorite conspiracy. And that's like one of those things where there's enough documentation to like where we know that it happened with like we are almost certain that we know that it happened.
Oh no, it happened. We're not almost certain. We are certain.
But it's the type of thing where it's like we don't quite know what happened. There's a lot of like conflicting reports and incomplete documentation and a lot of redacted things. And, it was one of those things where it was like, who knows? Who knows exactly what was going on and what the long lasting effects of that were. And maybe are, and maybe continue to be. Who knows?
Yeah, and the thing I want to close with before we kind of give our ratings on the conspiracy, it's one of my favorite kind of stories. And if you don't know about this, this is a little bit of a shock to your brain a little bit. What if I told you that there was a conspiracy theory that after World War II, the United States government brought over top-ranking Nazi officials and Nazi scientists to work for the U.S. government, and they helped further along our scientific discoveries for the last 40 or 50 years.
Oh, that's not even a conspiracy. That's
right.
Just real. That happened.
That's right. And that to me is one of those things where, like you said, why would you even believe that? But then when you hear about it, it's way worse than you could ever have imagined.
Right. It's like one of those things like, hey, remember all those Nazi scientists who were coming up with like really messed up and insane ways to like kill Jews and like take over the world for, 10, 15, 20 years or whatever? Yeah, we grabbed a bunch of those guys and said like,
gave them clemency from the courts.
You can either die or you can come and work with us. And if you come and work, one of those guys, was one of the founders of NASA. We would have never gone to space without that guy.
Yep.
We would have never possibly landed on the moon. Did we land on the moon?
Oh boy, that's another good one. That's a weird one.
I've seen a lot of. There's a lot around the moon landing where it's like, maybe we didn't it's not that we never went to the moon, it's that we never went to the moon in 1969. And
Right.
so it's like one of those things where, I don't know. Stanley Kubrick maybe helped them, you know.
Now you're believing Room 237.
No, I mean like beyond that or whatever.
Right.
It's just I don't know. Yeah. That's
But if you
another
do-
insane conspiracy.
If you don't know what I'm talking about, though, what I am talking about is Operation Paperclip. If you want to look it up, go ahead and do that. It's really a stain on kind of the country's intelligence community and kind of the way the country conducted itself in a post-war atmosphere in the last true, great war that we hopefully will ever have to fight. But I can't make that promise, folks. So
yeah, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, what do you do in this situation? Do you just tell those people to go fuck themselves and they should rot in hell for all the horrible shit that their brains were put to work doing or whatever? How invested were those people in like all the fucked up stuff, or like were they just trying to stay alive and just doing what they could to I don't know.
Well, and again, I mean, you have movies like October Sky that, deify Werner von Braun, who was one of the scientists brought over through Operation Paperclip. And he is a major part in that film. And again, it's crazy. People don't know about it. And it's just one of those things where you just have to, again, if I told you about it and you didn't know what I was talking about, you wouldn't believe me.
Yeah, but it's true.
But it's true. Very true. What would you give the conspiracy out of 5?
I don't know. I'm going to give it like a 3.8 out of 5.
Wow.
I don't know. I mean, I want to give it a 4. I'm just going to give it a 4. Fuck it. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. I think that this movie is really effective and it's super lean and there's not a lot of fluff or whatever, and they just get right to the point. And I think it's creepy. I think it's very effective at being creepy. I think all the way up until the very end of the movie, I still think it's creepy. It's one of those movies that's going to fly under the radar for a lot of people. It got like a direct to, video on demand or DVD release or whatever 5 years ago. But it's definitely worth hunting down and watching. Especially if, like us, you're looking for a bunch of found footage type of stuff. This movie will definitely fit in nicely in your found footage October movie watch list.
Yeah, I'm going to give it a 4.5 out of 5. I mean, again, with this kind of being right inside of my wheelhouse and the performances being so good, and the last third of this movie really is pretty scary, and there's a nice little twist at the end of the film that, again, I don't want to ruin, but if you pick up on it and you pick up kind of what you've seen up until this point and how that twist affects the entire film, I think it's infinitely even kind of more kind of fucked up, and it really fucks with your head. Yeah. So I think it's a fun, interesting movie that really, again, if this is, it's going to really be kind of what you put into it, what you come into it. But if you're a fan of conspiracy theories and that's something that you're interested in, you need to get on this and watch this immediately, because this is something that you're really going to enjoy. Well, let's take another break and we'll play a preview for the next Culture Cast.
73 Apple, take 1, Mark.
The story of Alzheimer's is never about one person. My PhD I'm gonna start again.
You want to keep the house? You need to sacrifice. You talk to me about sacrifice?
Hey. Hi.
Ma! They want to make a movie about me.
Yes. We will live and document our subjects' physical and mental degradation over the course of 2 one-month periods.
We're gonna have fun, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I'm not interested in being exploited.
Sarah mentioned that Deb's been sleepwalking pretty bad. So let's set up surveillance cams.
Ma?
You really gave us all quite a fright with your late-night gardening.
This is not normal sleepwalking. You should come see this. It's not good, Doc. Do you remember a man named Henri Desjardins? Went missing 30 years ago.
I tried to wash you in the river, you know.
How lucky you become.
That woman is crazy.
The notion of spiritual parasites does exist.
Okay.
That's right. On the next Culture Cast, we are talking about The Taking of Deborah Logan. I've never seen it. I'm excited to talk about it. Should be interesting.
Deborah, no!
I've heard good things. You picked this one out, so...
Another sort of documentary-esque, found footage-esque movie.
And you'll kind of notice that that's a theme this month, is picking movies that aren't just solely found footage, because I'm going to level with you. Solely found footage movies are probably the ones that get the bad rap.
Yeah, those are the ones where it's pretty hard to do that. I mean, even if you think about like all the successful found footage movies, even if they don't maybe hold up today, you know, things like Blair Witch Project and stuff like that, who I mean, at the time when it came out, people were blown away by that movie. And essentially that movie was a documentary where it started as a regular documentary and sort of just devolved into found footage, you know, as sort of time went on. And that's, I think, what a lot of effective found footage movies do, is they really start as one thing and sort of devolve into found footage as time goes on.
Or they find an interesting way to subvert your expectations with the genre and give us a reason why those cameras are rolling. Because that's the biggest conceit you have. That's the biggest hurdle any found footage film has to get over, is why are the cameras rolling? And when you have something like, say, Ghostwatch or WNUF Halloween Special, or this film, or what was the first film we talked about?
What was the first movie we talked about?
It was whatever we talked about before Venom.
What did we talk about before Venom?
I don't know. Let me look. Hell House.
Oh, Hell House.
Yeah. Or even Hell House LLC. Maybe not so much Hell House LLC, but again, still pretty close. That's more, I would say, akin to traditional found footage horror. If you can give us an interesting conceit as to why the cameras continue to roll, even while this fucked up shit, supernatural shit, thriller-esque conspiracy theory shit is going on, I think that automatically gives me an easier way to buy in.
Yeah, no, I agree. You know, you need a reason to be watching this at all. So I think that this movie really sort of, you know, goes into that really naturally and smoothly. And yeah, it's definitely, I think it's a cool movie, and it's definitely different than a lot of other weird, you know, found footage faux documentary movies. And it's, you know, very effective and worth watching.
Yeah, and I agree. And you know, I don't want to deride a film like Blair Witch because it helped push the genre to kind of the popular forefront, but there was stuff that came before it. And
Cannibal Holocaust, like in the late 70s or whatever.
Ghostwatch came before it as well. I'd like to point that out.
Yeah.
So, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. And there are things that Blair Witch cops from Cannibal Holocaust, especially like, you know, these people are actually dead. I mean, Cannibal Holocaust took it one step too far by having the actors sign forms to say they weren't going to show up for a year, which is, I think that's pretty irresponsible from a covering your own ass way. But
I mean, I think it's hilarious, but
it's hilarious, but like, why? Like, that's just kind of like, yeah, you're dumb. But I mean, one of my least favorite films I've ever seen is Cloverfield, and I go back to it because why doesn't TJ Miller just put the fucking camera down?
Because people are going to want to see this.
Yeah,
people are going to want to know what happened.
No,
that is exactly what he says.
That's the line they put in the movie, and it doesn't, you know, just putting that in there doesn't explain away anything.
Yeah, and I mean, I love Cloverfield, like, even though it's a movie full of weird holes and problems, but it also created this sort of like weird viral alternate reality thing that has not really been done quite in the same way since then. So like the Cloverfield universe sort of extends so far beyond the, you know, now 3 Cloverfield movies that we have, that I feel like the movies are almost the smallest part of the franchise at this point. But I don't know, a conversation for another day, maybe, if we're going to talk weird sci-fi universe movies. But
yeah, and none of those Cloverfield movies are as good as 10 Cloverfield Lane, at least up until the point where she escapes from the bunker.
Yeah, then it goes full weird Cloverfield.
And then it just goes bad CGI in the middle of the night that is in the night because the budget wasn't high enough to make visually convincing CGI. Which, by the way, easiest trick in the book, if you didn't know that, if you want to hide the fact that you don't have a very high CGI budget, just have
do it in the
night.
dark. Yeah.
Yep, do it in the dark.
I mean, people were doing that long before CGI was even a thing. Hide your effects in the dark. It actually helps them look better.
Yeah. So
and things are scarier when you don't see them, man.
Yeah.
Shit.
It is. But at the same time, sometimes it just looks like gobbledygook nonsense.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So I always ask you, but I know what your answer is going to be. Where can people find you, Eric?
They can't. They can find me at the grocery store, walking about town, perhaps on the beach, smoking a doobie, trying to pet the dog that's closest to me.
Man, that's really oddly specific.
Well, I like the beach, and dogs are cool. And why would you go to the beach and not smoke weed?
And you can smoke, and where you live in California, you can smoke weed legally. So there you go. You can find me on Twitter at Culture Stash. And if you want to find out more about today's episode and our massive backlog of episodes of the Culture Cast, head on over to culturecast.com. You'll find links over to iTunes where you can rate and review the show, and to Patreon where you can kick a couple dollars our way. You'll get access to some unreleased episodes, chance to pick out what movies we watch, chance to be on a podcast. So if that's something you're interested in, go on over and do that. Big thanks to James Gilbert and Aaron Poole for sitting down and talking with me. Big thanks to you, Eric, for the intro-outro music, the kick-ass new, super moody intro-outro music. Every week, I'm just going to thank you until I forget, which probably will be never because I edit these folks, so there you go. And make sure to check out the next Culture Cast.